that is for your sake. This morning's reading is from Psalm 119. Teach me, O Lord, the way of your statutes, and I will observe it to the end. Give me understanding, that I may keep your law and observe it with my whole heart. Lead me in the path of your commandments, for I delight in it. Turn my heart to your decrees, and not to selfish gain. Turn my eyes from looking at vanities. Give me life in your ways. Confirm to your servant your promise, which is for those who fear you. Turn away the disgrace that I dread, for your ordinances are good. See, I have longed for your precepts. In your righteousness, give me life. Let your steadfast love come to me, O Lord, your salvation according to your promise.
Welcome to our latest Ask the Minister Sunday. For those of you who are new to this, what happens on these Sundays, instead of my delivering a message, I will do my best to try to answer a variety of theological and biblical, spiritual, and personal questions in the as many as time allows. And some have been sent in already, and then, of course, we always get some from those who are here in person. So I always start with one of the cards that's been sent in ahead of time, and then we'll go from there. In regard to last Sunday's message about dreams, have you known anyone who has gotten a message from God in a dream? The answer is no. And when I say no, I mean no as in a message from God in a literal dream, okay, in the dreams that we have at night. When we hear that word dream in the biblical literature, it is not meant so much to refer to an actual physical, biological dream as it is a metaphor. It is a metaphor for a way in which God communicates with us. And so, essentially, it is a metaphor for some insight or inspiration or message that God is trying to communicate to us. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it is in a literal dream. It is just a representation of how God communicates to us in a non-literal way. Okay. All right, what do you got? Oh, Nelson, you had a question, right? Yes. Nelson's question earlier was, he sees in the bulletin, every week in the bulletin we have that we are an open and affirming as well as a creation justice church. And he said that he knows what open and affirming means. For those of you who don't, it means that we officially proclaim our full welcome and equality to all those who live in a different sexual orientation or gender expression. Okay. What it means to be a Creation Justice Sunday, and this is something that I think was instituted here just a few years before my arrival, is it is an open, formal declaration that this spiritual community is deeply conscious of and deeply honors the importance of creation, the fact that we are not called by God to be the rulers of creation, but instead are called to be its stewards, which is a word that means caretaker. Or as other theologians present it, that we are called to be partners with creation in helping to bring about God's ways in the world. So again, it is a natural for this particular spiritual community to be a creation justice congregation, considering that we are on this beautiful island. Along with that formal declaration, there is also this sort of underlying theme which recognizes the fact that some of the effects of our misuse of creation fall mostly on the poor. Okay, one of the things that research has demonstrated is that pollution and all of the other harmful things that have happened due to our misuse of creation, those effects are experienced much more deeply by the poor. They are the ones who are much more likely to have a factory blowing smoke into the air next to them and things of that nature. So this idea of creation justice in the United Church of Christ, and really beyond it, also recognizes that aspect of it as well. Right? Does that answer your question, Nelson? Okay, great. All right, what do we got? I like that you don't wear a robe, but was wondering what your reasoning for all of that is and what led you to that decision. What, and cover up all this? Oh. What led me to that, and I didn't start doing it until a few years ago, probably 6 or 7 years ago now, and it just was an outgrowth of my evolving understanding of ministry and what it meant to be a pastor and to have pastoral authority, as well as just sort of my general theological outlook. I'm not one for, one of the reasons I got into the UCC was because I had developed an understanding of the Gospels and the Bible in general over the course of a number of years that was much less hierarchical than what I had grown up with in the Catholic Church. And so as that continued to evolve over time, I got this sense of wanting as few boundaries between me and you on a Sunday morning as possible. And so one of those for me was the robe. I mean, to me it was like, okay, I get it. First of all, as you know, I don't really stand still a lot, so it's a lot more comfortable, a lot easier to move without one. But from a theological standpoint, it really was sort of about boundaries and not wanting to have things between us that maybe weren't necessary. I mean, if I don't have, my feeling came to be that if I don't have pastoral authority, that you don't take me seriously with what I have to say and what I do without a robe, I don't think you're going to do that just because I have one on. So that's kind of how it all came about. So, your turn. Oh, come on, there's always questions. Bruce?
Well, this is a continuation of Nelson's questions. The UCC, have you been a minister of the UCC church before? Are there other UCC churches in Fort Myers or the area? Does this declaration of what we are as a UCC church, are other UCC churches very different?
So, yes, I have only ever been a UCC minister. Yeah, I was ordained in the UCC, and I've been in UCC churches in Montclair, New Jersey, Westfield, New Jersey, Manchester, Mass, and now here. Okay, so I don't have, there's a denomination called the Disciples of Christ, for instance, which is another Protestant denomination. They are like our sister congregation. So I would have standing in one of their churches to serve. But I don't have standing to serve a Lutheran church or a Presbyterian church. I could be granted that, but I'd have to go through a process to get it. The UCC, I can serve any UCC church. So are there others in the area? Not many. Not many. The closest one to here is Fort Myers, United Church of Christ. There are 2 in Naples and 1 in Punta Gorda, I I think, yeah. So there's, so the closest one to here is Fort Myers. And that kind of all fell into play with how I ended up here. Because, we had our house in Cape Coral years ago with the idea that we would probably, we'd retire there eventually. Never thinking that a church reasonably close to that house in the UCC would be open, because there's only two, Fort Myers and this one. So, and then this one came open. So those are the closest ones. Now, in terms of the last part of the question, our being an open and affirming and a creation justice church, the UCC has a handful of those kinds of, I call them special designations, because they're things that you must sort of formally go through a process of applying to be granted. But not every UCC church is open and affirming. There are many, many, many who still are not. And there are many more who are not creation justice churches either. The creation justice designation is a much more recent one. The open and affirming one's been around for a while. And gradually more and more are, but there are many who aren't. And that's the thing we've talked about with the UCC, is we are what's called a non-creedal church, in that there is no statement of faith that everyone in the UCC has to agree to. Everyone has freedom of conscience to formulate their own spiritual beliefs. So with that comes the fact that the UCC, I talked about hierarchy before. One of the things about the UCC, why I ended up in the UCC, was its lack of hierarchy. We have a main office, a head office in Cleveland with what's called a president and general minister. But they cannot ever tell us anything in terms of what we have to do. Every UCC church is individually governed. It's a lot like the Baptists in that way. Okay. So that means then, and this won't surprise you knowing that, is that our UCC churches have a very wide range of theological beliefs and biblical understandings. If you go to certain parts of the country, you will find a much more literal understanding of the Bible. Maybe not like you would find in a Baptist church or churches like that, but certainly more than perhaps this one or other ones in New England or New York or New Jersey. I mean, if you go to Indiana or parts of Pennsylvania, they tend to be a little bit more literal in their theological and biblical understandings. But again, every congregation is free to be who it is that they choose to be. Okay? Okay. Judy? And there's Barbara in the back. Judy giving credit to Barbara for those. Barbara, was that a fair description of... Judy was giving credit to Barbara Cooley for being the lead person for those two designations for us. Was that a fair explanation of creation justice designation? What would you add to that? Okay. Great. And that's often how it works. It works organically in terms of what a congregation already is or is moving towards, and then they seek the designation. Yeah. Susan? Well, we don't have an official position in terms of there's no declaration from this congregation as to whose side we're on. The time that I addressed it shortly after it started, what I was trying to get across was that our objective needs to be to figure out how to be on God's side as best as possible. Okay, and I have, and Rabbi Schnitzer and I from Bat Yam, we have discussed this endlessly. And we are both very much on the same page that, we both feel that there is a lot to answer for on the part of the Israeli government, but at the same time, and I said this in the message the week after the war started, what do you do when your enemy has as its official position your annihilation? So anyone who says that this is an easy black and white, good guy, bad guy, easy to discern, I think is delusional. So there is no official position. I mean, I am essentially the spokesperson for the congregation in that way, but my position is, all right, there's work to be done with all of it. And but what I do, hopefully, I pray for daily, is a ceasefire. Let's at least just stop the shooting and the bombing, at least for a minute, to try to regather and see, all right, what can we do here? So that's that. We know you don't use the lectionary in choosing Bible readings for Sunday. So how do you go about selecting a particular passage and formulating your message? Where do you draw inspiration and guidance from? So the first thing is, to just so we're on the same page, the question refers to something called the lectionary. Okay? In many Christian denominations, the Catholics, the Episcopalians, most of the mainline, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, us, there is something that's frequently used that's called the Revised Common Lectionary. And what that essentially does is it lays out a set of Bible readings for each day of the year, and particularly for each Sunday, a mix of Hebrew scriptures and Christian scriptures. And what many, I would say easily most ministers do is they use the lectionary in terms of guiding their particular message preparation, what reading they're going to use, and then they do it that way, unless they do, for instance, an Advent or a Lenten theme for a series of weeks. I don't do that. Occasionally I will go to the lectionary, but for the most part, that just hasn't worked the best for me. As I've said before, I tend to be a spirit-led preacher in that I am always sort of looking and listening to see, all right, what's going on in our people's lives of the community I serve, what's going on in people's lives in general, what's going on in the country, what's going on in the world, what holidays are we observing? I mean, is it 4th of July? Is it Memorial Day? Do we talk about things like that? So I tend to work in that way. And in terms of drawing inspiration, as my wife's favorite phrase is, everything is a sermon in the making for you. And that is true. That is very true. One of the things we talk about in Bible study a lot is connecting the dots. Okay, looking at something in a biblical passage and then being able to connect it to something going on now, something historically, and seeing how I sort of see the world as completely interconnected. And so I approach this in that same way. I'll watch a movie. I'll see a scene in a movie, and I'll just start to connect the dots. All right, how does this connect to our lives now? How does it connect to a story in the Bible, or things like that? It could be a movie, it could be a song, it could be, you name it, a casual conversation. When we talked about, suicide 3-4 weeks ago, it was because of a series of conversations that happened within a short time. So that's my general approach. I do not use the lectionary, that's why, and instead I go this particular way. Your turn, Frank. Yeah, how about an easy one?
I'd like to ask you about, in Genesis, they spend a lot of time discussing Abraham, and a lot of time discussing Jacob and Esau, but there's very little written about Isaac, and I wondered if you could maybe flesh that out a little bit. I've always wondered why there was so little information about him, just a couple of stories.
And that's an easy one. How exactly? Good grief. Question was, there's a lot in Genesis about Abraham and Jacob, not a lot about Isaac. Why is that? Well, as best as I can tell, okay, I certainly do not have the definitive answer. There is so much about Abraham because he is the patriarch of all of it. I mean, he is essentially the first Jew, which means he is our most direct ancestor. Okay? And then there's Isaac, and then Jacob. Okay? And Jacob we have a lot about, and mostly that is because Jacob is the patriarch of Israel. Okay? He is considered to be the starter of the nation of Israel. Okay, in fact, in the biblical literature in Genesis, there is a point where God renames him Israel. Okay? And then, of course, there are his, all of his sons who are the patriarchs of what we will know as the 12 tribes of Israel. So that is extremely vital. So my guess really is there's not as much about Isaac because Isaac is a bridge. Isaac is a bridge character. We have those in different places in the Bible. He's a bridge character between Abraham as the first Jew and then Jacob as the father of Israel. Maybe I'll go back to your question, Frank. What is your reaction to the law passed in Louisiana this week requiring that the 10 Commandments be posted in all public school classrooms? Yeah, because I would have gotten to that eventually in a message, so. I am not a fan. Let's put it that way. I'm not a fan. Obviously, I don't have anything against the 10 Commandments. But I'm not a fan of this decision for a number of reasons. And I did jot down a couple of notes on this one. Okay. One of the rationales, and I watched an extended interview with the member of the Louisiana House who was a co-sponsor of the bill. And her major defense of it was that the 10 Commandments were a public document, no different than the Mayflower Compact or the Magna Carta. Okay? And I think that's incorrect. It is very different than the Mayflower Compact and the Magna Carta. I mean, this is, it is a part of a piece of religious literature. And it's not a separate document in and of itself like those are. You can't take it out of the context of the fact that it is part of a religious tradition. It is part of the literature, the scripture of a religious tradition, Judaism and ours, which then leads to one of the other issues I have with it, of course, and that is why our public schools or any public institution would be required to have a document that is specific to a religion, or in this case, two religions. which then leads, of course, to the whole church and state issue, which I happen to be a fan of. I'm a fan of that. And I know that the argument, the argument usually is that we should have that so that the government cannot establish a state religion. And absolutely. Okay. But I also think we should have that for the sake of our religion. Because the last thing I want as a Christian is Christianity to be the state religion. That's the last thing I want. Because we know how that goes. Okay, we have seen it throughout history where the church is co-opted by governments with ill intentions. I mean, we don't have to look that far back. Okay? All you got to do is read Bonhoeffer. And you see what happened during Nazi Germany when the Christian churches in Germany were co-opted by the Nazis. Lost their focus. They lost their focus. Okay, so the last thing I want is that, and again, yeah, for the sake of the state, but just as much, if not more, for the sake of our religion. Okay. And then lastly, again, not a big fan, because the decision reflects a certain understanding and interpretation of what the Ten Commandments are. It reflects an understanding and interpretation of them that is based on our time and our culture. But that's not when they were written, and it's not what they were written for. I mean, if we look at some of those commandments, for instance, honor your father and your mother. Okay? Sounds great, right? But it wasn't really written the way we use that commandment now. The reason that commandment is in there, it's a part of Jewish culture. It was a command to not neglect your parents when they became when they came into economic need. Okay? Thou shalt not bear false witness. Okay, what do we say that? Well, it teaches us not to lie. Well, yeah, but that's not what it was. That commandment is grounded in Jewish judicial practices. Okay? That there needed to be 2 eyewitnesses to any offense in order for someone to be found guilty. So it really is a legal principle that's involved in that commandment. So we take the commandments and we interpret them as if they were written yesterday instead of 3,000 years ago in a particular time and place. Now again, the principles certainly apply. Shouldn't lie, we should honor our parents, that kind of thing. But again, it reflects this sort of set in stone fundamental type understanding of what they are. And again, it divorces them from their spiritual heritage. I think that's all the reasons I have. That was enough. Yes, Tom?
Do you find it a stepping stone? They wanted it as a stepping stone to a theocratic bill.
I don't know what anyone's motivations are, but I do believe that there is a segment of our population that would like us to officially be a Christian nation, to be a theocracy. Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. This whole, and I've talked about this before on some Sundays, and preview, I'll talk about it again next Sunday because we'll be talking about sort of the 4th of July and freedom and those kinds of things. I am deeply concerned about the rise of Christian nationalism in this nation. The fact that there is a difference between freedom of religion, freedom to practice one's faith, and really wanting to impose one's faith on everyone else. And I do see more of that movement in recent times. Any others? Yes, Bev?
How do we rectify our belief that it is not a good thing to try
How do we reconcile, say it again, wanting to practice our faith, but at the same time send missionaries out to convert, for lack of a better word, to different parts of the world? Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's a hard one. That's a hard one. I do think it is legitimate to go out and share one's faith. I do not think it's legitimate to go out and impose one's faith. But to go out and to say, hey, this is what I have found in this belief system. And and maybe you could benefit from it too. Maybe it would make your life better too. To communicate in that way, I think, is perfectly legitimate. But I'm not sure that that's what always happens when people go out, missionaries go out into the field. The fact is that the missionary movement throughout history has not always distinguished itself. It has been, too often throughout history, more about coercion than it is about honest, spirit-filled kind of persuasion or encouragement. So yes, I mean we saw it here with the Native American population in this country, and we saw it when the slaves were brought from Africa and forced to become Christians. So we have seen this throughout history, and so no, and I don't yes, there is that commandment that Jesus gives at the end of Matthew's gospel that's called the Great Commissioning. Go out and make disciples of all the world. But Jesus doesn't say go out and force everybody to be a disciple. What he is encouraging them to do is to go out and live the way that he showed and taught them to, which is a far different matter than going out and demanding or forcing someone. I think it kind of connects, I talk about connecting the dots with what I said earlier about pastoral authority. And I don't wear, the whole thing, a robe doesn't give me pastoral authority. If, I can't coerce you to live out your faith. Just try to talk about it and encourage and inspire and challenge and those kinds of things. So that's what I would say to that. Time for one more, if there is. If not, that's okay. Yes, Joanne?
How do you justify some of the harsher statements in the Bible about homosexuality with our beliefs?
Great question. How do I justify some of the harsher statements about homosexuality in the Bible with our beliefs? And I will defer to my mentor in seminary, Dr. Dana Nolan Fuel, who's an expert in the Hebrew Scriptures, and her position, and she is far from alone, is that we need to keep in mind a couple of primary things. The first of all is that people in that time and place did not understand homosexuality or being LGBTQ, any of that, as who a person was, as a part of who a person was. They didn't understand that. They didn't have the science. They didn't have the things that we understand now. So there was no conception of that. To them, it was just an aberration. And we know how humanity is with something that's different. We fear what is different. So there's that. On the larger scale, though, Dr. Fuel says, we have to keep in mind, because primarily we're talking about texts in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, in the Hebrew Scriptures. What she says we have to keep in mind is that those texts were written by a people who were coming out of bondage and attempting to rebuild their society. Okay? So what was encouraged, what was expected, what was seen as the only legitimate way was a lifestyle that, you know, a man and a woman and biological children in order to rebuild their society. And so that is, that's a primary factor in there too. And then the third thing that she mentions is that when you look at the language carefully, what it is referring to mostly in terms of those proscriptions has to do with relationships in which there is a significant difference in power dynamic. So essentially abuse or coerced sexual behavior, those kinds of things. So she says you take those three factors into consideration and it really diminishes the idea of taking those statements literally. Is that okay? All right.